Well, research shows that French authorities are part of a cult that has brainwashed them and keeps them from thinking clearly. It's the cult of tolerance. Tolerance with a lowercase t is a good thing. We disagree, but let's not kill each other over it. That's a healthy kind of tolerance. But there's something else that's called tolerance, but isn't like the other tolerance at all. This kind of tolerance says you have to do what we do and say what we say and think what we think, or we'll destroy you because we're tolerant. Seems like the exact opposite of what the word tolerance actually means, but that's what cults do. They use the same words, but radically change the meanings. This sinister kind of tolerance is much more important to the French. So important, in fact, that we'll call it tolerance with a capital T. We capitalize this kind of tolerance because it's a proper name. The people of France worship it. How do I know they worship it? I know because they sacrifice their people to it. Tolerance, with a capital T, demands sacrifice, and it tests the faith of its followers. For instance, it says, here's a book that calls for your violent subjugation and the destruction of everything you hold dear. I want you to defend it with your lives. I want you to mock and ridicule anyone who dares question or criticize it. And when it comes for your men and your women and your children and your priests, you must offer them all up on my altar to satisfy me. And so the new priests are sacrificing the old. The most brilliant aspect of this cult is its twisting of language. Using the word tolerance to promote and defend the most vicious sort of intolerance is the height of manipulation. Even now, as I'm mocking tolerance with a capital T, you think I'm mocking tolerance with a lowercase t, as if I'm telling you to go out and attack Muslims. The cult of tolerance has brainwashed you into thinking that there are only two possibilities. Either you protect Islam from any criticism whatsoever, or you go on an anti-Muslim killing spree. You don't want to go on an anti-Muslim killing spree, do you? Well then, you have to protect Islam from any criticism whatsoever. Absolutely ridiculous to think that these are the only alternatives, but cults have their myths. And this is the most cherished myth of the cult of tolerance. Those of us who reject the cult know that if you want to protect your men and your women and your children and your priests, you don't have to go on any killing sprees. You just have to stop protecting Islam from criticism. Islam can't stand up to criticism. That's why jihadis kill cartoonists, as the people of France know all too well. This is shockingly simple. Learn the facts about Muhammad and the Quran and share them until they become common knowledge. In the meantime, the French military will have to deal with military threats, and French police will have to deal with local threats. But the only long-term solution to jihad is to undermine and expose its root, which is Muhammad. And this isn't just good for the victims of terrorism. It's good for potential terrorists as well. I don't know about you, but when I read about a 19-year-old who had already tried repeatedly to join ISIS, slitting a priest's throat, and I know that he did it because his community pumped his head full of complete nonsense, and no one bothered to challenge what was being pumped into his head because the cult of false tolerance says, keep your mouth shut and let him die and take as many people with him as possible. I think to myself, what kind of monster would I be if I didn't shout this from the rooftops? Letting these young men kill and die for the most obvious false prophet in history is beyond heartless. But what else should we expect from a nation that sacrifices its own children and its own priests on the altar of false tolerance? Tear down the altar, France. False tolerance is no more worthy of worship than Moloch.